They were not just animals. They were engines of war, monsters clad in iron and leather, towering beasts that turned the earth beneath them into trembling mud. In the age before tanks, before artillery, before gunpowder ever screamed across the battlefield, war elephants were the ultimate power play. Catching an elephant for war means strategy, sacrifice, and the kind of ambition that burns brighter than fear. To understand what it meant to unleash these behemoths, we have to go back. Skilled trackers and hunters would locate elephant herds and slowly drive them into enclosures using fire, noise, and sheer force of will. These enclosures, made of massive timber stakes and walls, would close in around the elephants, separating the calves and younger males from the rest. Porus fielded over 200 elephants, each one a living wall of muscle and rage. Alexander, having never faced such beasts, was forced to adapt on the battlefield. His phalanx formations buckled, his horses panicked. Under leaders like Hamilcar Barca and his infamous son Hannibal, elephants became central to their strategy against the growing threat of Rome. Imagine this. A commander decides not only to invade the Roman Republic, but to do it by crossing the Pyrenees, the Rhine River, and then the snow-capped Alps with a train of 37 war elephants. It was madness. And yet it worked. Sort of. But here's the twist. Carthage didn't use the same Indian elephants. Your support helps the channel grow and brings more epic stories to life. Now back to the battlefield. Here, Hannibal once again fielded his elephants, up to 80 of them, lined up like a wall of flesh and fury. But Rome had learned. Scipio Africanus, one of Rome's greatest generals, knew exactly what to expect. He trained his troops to create corridors within their ranks, openings that would allow the charging elephants to pass harmlessly through instead of trampling the lines. Trumpets blared, spears flew. The elephants, confused and panicked, turned around and stampeded their own men. But the psychological impact of even a few surviving beasts thundering into Italy was enormous. Roman legions, trained and disciplined, had never seen anything like it. They employed them selectively, especially in eastern campaigns, often against the successor kingdoms of Alexander. But Rome knew something most did not. Elephants were a double-edged sword. They were expensive to maintain, difficult to transport, and devastating if things went wrong. New military technologies, longbows, crossbows, siege engines, began to level the field. You become part of its pain, its strength, its silence. You learn its rhythms. You understand that to ride into battle atop a beast that can crush a man with a flick of its trunk, you must first confront your own fear and defeat it. But the legend remained. In Southeast Asia, kingdoms like the Khmer and the Ayutthaya continued using elephants into the 18th century. And even as late as World War I, elephants were used to haul artillery and supplies through terrain too rough for vehicles. They could break enemy lines, but they could just as easily trample their own. The sheer sight of these towering creatures sowed panic among cavalry units and destabilized entire formations. Centuries after Alexander, the Maurya Empire, under Chandragupta, and later Ashoka, built entire military systems around elephants. They were symbols of domination over nature, of kings who dared to bend the wild to their will. And every empire that dared to field them wrote its name in the blood and thunder of history. Ashoka's army reportedly fielded over 9,000 elephants at its peak. These were not just used for battle. They carried supplies, transported elite archers, and served as mobile platforms for commanders. Their presence could sway the morale of entire armies. They relied on the now extinct North African forest elephants, smaller, more agile, and easier to maneuver through mountainous terrain. And yet, with superior coordination and cunning tactics, he managed to win, but at a staggering cost. Kingdoms developed entire industries around elephant capture and training. Specialized trainers, known as mahows, formed lifelong bonds with their beasts. They slept beside them, fed them, healed their wounds, and guided them into battle with whispered commands. In return, the elephants offered a kind of loyalty unmatched by any cavalry or soldier. But the price of betrayal, if the elephant panicked or turned rogue, was catastrophic. The elephants had not only held their own, they had nearly changed the tide of one of history's most important battles. From that moment, the West began to take notice. Then began the taming. This was not an overnight process. It took months, sometimes years to break an elephant's will without breaking its spirit entirely. The strongest would become the mounts of kings, their foreheads adorned with gold, their tusks capped with blades, their minds trained to charge into the heart of death. Not just to Carthage, where Hannibal led his elephants across the Alps, but even earlier to the blistering jungles of India, to the dusty plains where kings gambled everything on the backs of living titans. They were fear, they were chaos, and those who dared to master them could change the course of entire empires. But here is the question that few dare to ask. How do you even catch a war elephant? This is not a story about taming. This is not about feeding bananas to a wild giant and slowly gaining its trust. No, this is war. Let's begin in the Indian subcontinent, around 1000 BCE. This is the cradle of war elephant tradition, land where elephants weren't just symbols of power, they were power. The Mahayanopadas, early Indian kingdoms, had already begun the practice of elephant warfare long before Alexander the Great even dreamed of conquest. Here, capturing an elephant wasn't just an act of bravery, it was a ritual. The forests of India were home to the Asian elephant, smaller and more temperamental than its African cousin, but perfectly suited for war. These were not random beasts pulled from the wild. They were chosen, hunted, and broken with precision. The hunt began with the Ketasysteman ingenious method that turned the jungle into a trap. But what happened when these majestic, terrifying creatures crossed cultures? In 326 BCE, Alexander the Great clashed with King Paris at the Battle of the Hydaspes River. Fast forward to the 3rd century BCE. Enter Carthage. While the Greeks admired elephants, the Carthaginians weaponized them. Hannibal's legendary march across the Alps in 218 BCE during the Second Punic War remains one of the most audacious military feats in history. The journey was brutal. Most of the elephants didn't survive the crossing. And now, just before we dive into the most devastating elephant battles and the long-term legacy of these monsters, a quick pause. If you're captivated by this kind of raw, ancient warfare where empires bet everything on tactics, beasts, and blood, make sure to hit that subscribe button right now. We bring you deep into history's most untold battles, forgotten strategies, and the minds of leaders who shaped the world. Let us revisit one of the most shocking moments in elephant warfare, the Battle of Zama in 202 BCE, a climactic showdown of the Second Punic War. It was the beginning of the end for Carthage. The Romans, impressed by the beasts, yet cautious of their unpredictability, began using elephants themselves. Back in India, however, the elephant never lost its prestige, but catching them, it never got easier. As the demand for elephants grew, so did the complexity of the Keta system. There's a reason why the ancient world eventually let go of elephant warfare. By the late Roman era and into the early medieval period, the dominance of elephants began to fade. So, how do you catch a war elephant? You don't just find one, you earn it. You enter its world. Because in the end, war elephants were more than weapons.